I've been living alone for many years, and the first thing I tried to do when I got home was to turn on the lights, but the power was out. This blackout must have only happened in my apartment because the lights in the building were on. I first checked the fuse with the light of the phone, and my guesses were right. The fuses had blown while I was away. I turned on the lights and went to my bedroom to change my clothes. I lay down on the bed, tired. I fell asleep a few minutes after lying down on the bed due to the tiredness of the day. My mother and I had argued a little in a phone conversation during the day, so I was feeling restless before going to sleep. When I woke up, it was 11 p.m. My restlessness seemed to have increased with the interruption of my sleep. The door to my room was open enough to see into the corridor, and I could hear a group of people arguing loudly. Perhaps it was these voices that woke me up. At first I did not pay attention to these voices. I thought that they were coming from one of my neighbors' houses, and that family arguments were normal. First I went to the kitchen and started eating yesterday's leftovers. The kitchen was closer to the door of my house, and so the voices became louder and louder. But after a while I realized that these noises were not coming from inside an apartment, but from the corridor of the apartment building. Feeling that this was not a family argument, I headed towards the door. First of all, I looked through the binoculars on the door to see if anyone was outside. There was no one in sight, but the voices were getting louder. As soon as I opened the door, the voices suddenly stopped, and I saw a boy of about 10 years old sitting on the stairs of the apartment building looking scared. This boy was dressed very tightly. Even though it was 30 degrees, he was wearing a very old and worn-out coat. He had a pair of very old boots on his feet. Although I had been living in this house for 4 years, this was the first time I had seen this boy. I did not know all my neighbors. The first thing that came to my mind was that the sounds of arguing were coming from this boy's house. I thought that the little boy was disturbed by the arguing and noise and left the house and sat on the stairs of the building. I greeted him and asked his name, but he didn't look up from his boat head. He was not moving at all, just sitting on the stairs waiting. I asked him where his parents were, but again I got no answer. Thinking that he was very scared, I told him to stay put and I would get you a glass of water, and I went to the kitchen and got the water I had prepared for myself. It must have taken me 10 seconds to do this, but when I returned, the child was gone. I could tell from the footsteps that he was going down the stairs of the building, but these footsteps were too loud for a small child. When I got to the ground floor of the building, I saw that the building attendant was painting over the mailboxes, and I asked him if the child had just come out. He looked shocked and said that he hadn't seen any child and that he had been here for half an hour and no one had been here. I was quite surprised. My house is on the 2nd floor, and I was sure that the child had not entered any of the apartments on the 1st floor because I did not hear the door of any of the apartments closed. I also knew that my neighbors on the 1st floor did not have children of that age. I then asked the apartment caretaker which apartment the sounds of arguing and shouting were coming from. He said that he did not hear any sounds of arguing. I was even more confused. Everything I experienced in the last 10 minutes was like a dream. I asked the apartment attendant again, "Are you sure no one was passing by?" He said yes again. I said good night and went back home. As I was walking up the stairs, I was thinking about why the sounds of arguing suddenly stopped as soon as I opened the door. I didn't sleep until the morning, and in the morning I fell asleep in front of the TV for a few hours, still not recovering from the eerie event. I quickly got ready and left the house so I wouldn't be late for work. I quickly put on my shoes. When I looked up to close the door, I was even more frightened and worried by what was engraved on my door. Thanks for help. My parents, my brother, and I live in a 3-story detached house. This incident happened in December 2020. I was 17 years old and my brother was 15 years old. Both of us were attending high school in the neighborhood where we lived. My parents worked during the day and would come home an hour after we returned from school. One morning we woke up to an ordinary day and left the house as a family. My brother Henry and I were on our way to school, and our day was as ordinary as it had started. One class before the end of school, Henry came up to me and told me that he wasn't coming home tonight to hang out with a friend from school and that he was going to his friend's house. He said he'd already told my mom. I took it in stride and said okay. And my brother and I left for our last classes. Our class ended and I started walking home alone. As I was walking home, my phone rang. It was my father. He said that he had been invited to a friend's birthday party and that he and my mom were going there. He asked if it was okay for me to be alone because he knew Henry wouldn't be there. I told him it was okay and that it would be good to spend some time by myself when no one else was home, so we hung up the phone. When I was home alone, I thought I would hang out in the living room and watch a good movie, and before I went home, I stopped at the supermarket and bought some of my favorite snacks. When I got home, I first went up to my room, changed my clothes, and went back downstairs to watch a movie in the living room. First, I prepared some snacks from the supermarket in the kitchen. I went into the living room and turned on one of the movies I had made a note to watch later. Everything was normal. It was raining outside and it was very cold. As I was watching the movie, I noticed that I was a little cold, so I stopped the movie and went upstairs to get a cardigan from my room. I noticed that the window in my room was open. That was the reason for the cold. I was quite surprised because I didn't remember opening the window in my room at all. I checked to see if maybe the screw was loose, but everything was normal. This scared me a little bit. I closed the window and grabbed my cardigan from the wardrobe and went back downstairs before I continued watching the movie. I called my mom and asked her when they were coming home. She told me that they had just arrived at the party and wouldn't be back for a few hours. I said okay and hung up the phone without saying anything so they wouldn't worry about me. I continued watching the movie. About 15 minutes later, I heard something falling from the upper floor of the house. I was startled and got up from my seat. First, I turned down the volume on the TV and focused on the voice I heard from upstairs. For a while, the only voice I heard was the rain outside, but after a few minutes, I started to hear voices again, as if someone was walking slowly and silently upstairs. My heart started to beat like it was going to burst. I was sure that someone was in the house. I started to wonder if he knew whether I was home or not. Meanwhile, I was waiting immobile so that he wouldn't notice me. I thought the most logical thing to do was to get out of the house quickly. Just as I was about to move, I heard the voices getting louder. I could see the stairs of the house, and as the voices got louder, I saw the shadow of the person on the stairs. I screamed and ran out of the house. I ran to our neighbor who lived across the street and knocked violently on the door. I was shaking with fear when they saw me like this. They were very worried and asked what happened. I told them in a tearful voice that someone was in the house and that I had run away. I told them what had happened and they called the police and then my parents, and told them what had happened. After 5 minutes, the police arrived. The door was open because I had left the house in fear. I was looking at the police from our neighbor's house. The police cautiously entered the house. They stayed in the house for 10 minutes, and then they came out and came to me. They asked me if I was okay. When they realized I was fine, they asked me if I had seen the person who entered the house. I told them that I heard voices and saw nothing but a shadow. One of the policemen said that someone had broken into the house, but that nothing visible had been stolen. He also said that there was nothing except mud marks on the floor. They said I should go with them to check the house to make sure nothing had been stolen. I was very scared and told them that I didn't want to do that. Before my family arrived, when my family arrived, we entered the house together and realized that there was nothing upstairs except mud marks. The burglar who broke into the house probably panicked at the sound of my screaming and left the house. The thief who broke into our house was never found, and even though it has been 3 years since this incident, I still cannot stay home alone.